Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this panel on AI and looking back on an eventful week in the beginning of the Trump administration with respect to AI. I'm fond of thinking of days or months during a Trump administration as having to be counted in dog years. So we've just gone through the first couple months of the Trump administration, according to that correspondence. My name is Satya Thallam. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at Americans for Responsible Innovation and a Senior Fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation. We have a great panel. And just before I hand it over for the other introductions, I just want to give a preview. We'll have a couple questions that we've sort of discussed amongst ourselves to kind of kick off discussion, but I should note that most of the next hour will be reserved for Q&A. There's a Q&A function. You all know how this works. So please get your questions in. We'll reserve as much time as possible. That will be the bulk of our panel before wrapping up. Alejandra, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Let me start by apologizing for any background noise. Appreciate you bearing with me, but I'm Alejandra Montoya-Boyer. I use she, her, AI pronouns, and I'm the Senior Director at the Center for Civil Rights and Technology at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We're the largest and oldest coalition of civil and human rights organizations with over 240 members. And right now we're working to make sure that AI is developed and deployed with the proper safeguards and to ensure fairness and equity so that everyone is able to benefit from these technologies.
Great. Courtney?
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Lang. I am Vice President of Policy for Trust Data and Technology at the Information Technology Industry Council, where I lead our global AI policy work. For those of you that are not familiar with ITI, we are a global tech trade association representing 80 member companies from across the technology ecosystem. What this means in the AI space is that we have a wide variety of companies across the AI ecosystem, including those that are developing AI, those that are deploying AI, and folks that are integrating AI into their different business models to evolve and be competitive in the global ecosystem.
Thanks, Courtney and Will.
Yeah. Thanks, Satya. My name is Will Rinehart. I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. I'm an economist who's been working on tech and innovation policy for 15 years now, and for the last 10, I've been focused on AI issues. Originally kind of on job loss predictions and kind of early concerns and questions over AI basically back in 2016. But obviously these things are roaring back now in the last 2 to 3 years. So I'm excited for this conversation, and I'm excited to get into the questions that you want to get through today.
Thanks, Will. And I'll also add, I promise he didn't solicit this, a plug for Will's newsletter at the Dispatch called Tech.
Yeah, every
If you
week I
want to keep
talk
up
about
a
tech.
lot of arcane things as well as like very specific current things. Trust me, you'll be entertained. But so we when we planned this panel, we wanted to plan it for 1 week out, notwithstanding even the kind of like sui generis Trumpian kind of chaos that tends to swirl and the time dilation that sort of occurs in a Trumpian world. We didn't anticipate, say, like DeepSeek, the announcement around DeepSeek and the incredible market disruption that would result in it. But like, we'll get to that. I promise, especially for the journalists, we will get to that. But let's pretend that that announcement hadn't happened. Will, I'm going to start with you. The sort of basic question we would say is like, so what do we say about in the absence of rescinding the Biden executive order on AI, replacing it? I'm using replace in kind of scare quotes. What's different now? Or I'll put it maybe a more specific way. If you're a frontier AI lab, what are you doing or not doing this week that you were or weren't doing 2 weeks ago?
Effectively nothing, right? The only thing that you're not doing now is with this. So, I mean, just for context, right? Trump rescinded the Biden executive order, which was set in October 2023. There were a whole bunch of things that came from this, some 150 requirements, a lot of reports, a lot of provisions, extensions of current authority, et cetera, et cetera. But the only thing that really truly was repealed with the Trump administration in this first week effectively were the reporting requirements. And that's an interesting sort of thing, an interesting sort of change. But it's pretty clear also with this new, so this that effectively. So all this is to say, right, that the Trump administration, or sorry, that Frontier Labs currently would only really be thinking about these reporting requirements Kind of the broader questions about authority, the FTC, the DOJ, all of these agencies having authority over frontier labs, whether or not they would be engaged in certain kinds of frameworks or, a whole bunch of kind of other things that are happening, that I think is still up in the air. Trump has said very clearly he wants to take a look at the entire sweep of regulatory space in AIs, and that's probably some 500 AI relevant regulations, right, that have been tracked across countless agencies and countless governance documents. So the near term is not a lot of shift, but what it's opened is it's fundamentally opened a space for kind of a rethink of what the AI regulatory regime looks like for new frontier firms, which I don't think is necessarily any different. It definitively changes the Biden administration's path with which it was going down, which I think is important to understand, but we'll leave that for later.
So, Courtney, maybe spinning out a little bit further from just the frontier AI labs, but the tech sector, both downstream energy. You work with a lot of companies across like a very diverse space. They don't all do the same thing, but obviously with a particular interest in AI. How can it be true? We had a whole election, right? And Trump said, I'm going to do everything the opposite, or at least orthogonal to what Biden was doing. How can it be the case that with this flurry of executive orders, with the sort of bombastic statements about the change in policy, how can it be that we probably not much has changed, or is that incorrect?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the important thing to note, as Will was alluding to when he was just speaking, is the AI executive order under the Biden administration laid out a lot of taskings and activities for specific agencies. It didn't have a lot of kind of regulatory requirements over the commercial space beyond, again, those BIS reporting requirements and then a potential proposed rulemaking specific to know your customer reporting requirements that were in theory going to be levied upon companies. So a lot of the taskings that were a part of that executive order were things that agencies were doing. And so many of those time horizons have already kind of passed, come to fruition, and those taskings have been completed. And so, it's the case, for example, that NIST created several guidance documents. Those are all out there and published. So companies can continue to leverage those. Of course, we know that there is kind of an ongoing review process now that the Trump administration is undertaking of, all policy, regulation, guidance documents, et cetera. That was a part of the newest executive order, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. But, that's all going on. But I think it's less so immediately practically that something has changed, and more so that now there is an opportunity, I think, for the new administration to kind of have a strategic reset, think a little bit about what are the things, perhaps that did not work that we need to address. And I think that, again, is going to come in the fashion of this AI action plan that folks have been tasked to develop as a part of the new AI executive order. So I think it's a moment for them to really think about, what is this vision that we want to put forward? How do we want to show up in this conversation? And I think that's why we're not seeing, kind of immediate change on the ground, but potentially things will continue to change as we move more deeply into this administration.
Alejandra, I want to throw that to you, but also add in this one wrinkle. At least rhetorically, it seems one area that the Trump administration is very much very much wanting to change from prior practice in the Biden administration. It falls into, I think, the bucket that a lot of us shorthand as current harms. So we think of things like bias, we think of potential discrimination, non-alignment, other kinds of harms that are less about sort of existential risk and safety and more about the kind of day-to-day uses. And that was something that the Biden-Harris administration had more affirmatively grasped onto. This is, again, rhetorically somewhere that the Trump administration is very much wanting to be outspoken and saying we're getting rid of any references to even a lot of those concepts. So what do you see as having changed, like actually having measurably changed in the last 2 weeks, or as Courtney and Will were alluding to, you're anticipating if you extrapolate out over the next year or two?
Yeah, I think for us, the worry is that while there's not necessarily a lot of direct impact on the developers and deployers and the way they're feeling it immediately, we are shifting away from a reality where we're very concerned about the safety and guardrails that AI and emerging technology pose. As you mentioned, there are real harms. It's not just potential harms. There are actual impacts on real people, whether that's their jobs, access to housing and mortgages, denial of loans. We're seeing AI play a role in harming our communities. And without the proper guardrails and safety, there's not a way to regulate whether developers and deployers are actually putting out safe, trusted technology. And at the end of the day, that's actually harmful for innovation. So this administration has really named that they want innovation at all costs. And our worry is that if we remove those opportunities for guardrails and safety, we're not actually going to be able to truly innovate because people won't actually trust the technology that we're putting out into the world. And so, this is a big sea change for us. In the civil rights community, we are deeply concerned about the shifts that rescinding the President Biden's executive order will cause. But it's also just signaling a massive change in the environment and ecosystem right now toward innovation without guardrails, when we know guardrails are critical to make sure that this technology is safe, unbiased, fair, and deployed effectively. And as I said, just reiterating that is critical for public trust.
I'm going to go back to Will for this next one. And hi, Miriam. Thanks for joining us. I'll give you a second to get settled in before I throw you into the den. And also a reminder to folks in the audience, start populating questions in the Q&A box. I promise that we will get to them. We'll have plenty of time for them. So Will, speaking of things just moving kind of on, sort of daily, hourly, real-time basis, what can we infer from the appointments, at least like the announced ones or the folk, Howard Lutnick he may still be in the confirmation hearing, right? Like as we speak, definitely started this morning. And for obvious reasons, questions around DeepSeek, China, AI, export controls came up. And from what I saw, these were things that I have not seen him publicly speak on very specifically. He's been more of a kind of a generalist, but we could throw Michael Pratsios in there, Gail Slater. What can we infer from this sort of crop, or is it just kind of are they all kind of their own node that we can't draw a conclusion from?
I think we're still kind of, I'm personally waiting to see how this all settles out, because there's a lot of things that are in flux, even with Trump right now, that I didn't imagine that would be part of this, right? The semiconductor tariffs. That was kind of a surprise to me that was even mentioned yesterday in this conversation, to just add to this. I guess that's just to say that, Trump has a way of being a high volatility character, and part of that is that this is typically what we see. We see a lot of movement, we see a lot of interest potentially, but then it takes a little while for things to settle out. The one thing I would mention that all of this, which is what Alejandra was hinting at and suggesting. The thing that I think is going to be interesting is to actually notice the difference between Trump administration previous, Trump 1 versus this current Trump, because probably one of the most, impactful cases that was brought, which was the Department of Justice and Meta's, the case that the Department of Justice eventually settled with Meta regarding its algorithmic discrimination, housing discrimination in its advertising algorithm. That case was actually started under the Trump administration. So they're, at least through these kind of normal means, the things that we suggest are probably the ways to actually bring about better outcomes with these companies, regulate AI companies. Even that bias and discrimination, one of the most major cases, came from the Trump administration. So it'll be interesting to see how that's parsed, which I think is super fascinating. There's been a lot of suggestion about DEI, and I don't really want to go into that, but I think the question will be where's the line between what Trump has been saying about, DEI efforts, and what does that actually mean, practically speaking, when it comes to housing regulation and, financial regulations, educational regulation that already has a lot of these protections built in.
And I'm happy to jump in on that one as well. I think it's a great question.
Miriam, please.
And my apologies. I don't know what happened there technically. I had finally entered the numbers in digitally, manually, and it worked. So sometimes technology is our friend and sometimes not. Anyhow, very, very pleased to be with you all today. And I just wanted to jump in because I think it's a really important question. And I can say personally, it gives me a lot of comfort and enthusiasm seeing some of the people who are joining the administration in the AI space. I'm sure we've all worked with a lot of these names. Seeing Michael Kratsios and Gail Slater and Lynn Parker returning the administration is a really great sign from my standpoint. They've worked in government. They know how to make it work. They bring different areas of expertise in addition to their government lens, from research, from industry, that are so key and important, as we all know, in navigating how to land appropriate AI policy. And I think that we can also look at some of their work in the past administration. We know that they led to EOs that are still executive orders that are still on the books, really important EOs asking for a survey of AI use in the government. Other important initiatives, they had a really impactful AI summit at the White House. Hopefully we'll see more of those. So I think these are all strong indicators, both of how seriously this administration is taking AI, which we can all see from all the headlines we've seen since just last week when they began, as well as some of these names that we know bring professionalism and insight.
Can I just make one other comment building on what Miriam was saying related to kind of Trump 1.0 administration efforts? Because I do think, some of the appointees, and again, like Will, I think we're all kind of waiting to see how things shake out and settle. But I do think, there is some indication that we may see a reprise of some of the Trump 1.0 efforts. And in addition to the 2 executive orders that administration put out, there was a federal standards engagement plan, which was something that was really important for U.S. leadership and in the development of global AI standards. There was also that initial OMB memo 2106 that they put out, under Trump 1.0. And I think despite the fact, right, that we're seeing perhaps conversation around a shift in framing and a more innovation-friendly approach, there were some principles that were contained within those memos around, the importance of fostering public trust and around transparency and around fairness and the way those things go hand in hand with innovation. And so, it is possible that we will see at least some focus on reprising those efforts moving forward. But of course, we're still in the very early days. So hard to say for certain what exactly direction that will go in.
Yeah, I'm trying to, and hopefully you guys can hear me. I have a little unstable internet, but I'm trying not to editorialize too much. But I think an underreported thing is that there were a lot of things in the Biden administration that had an antecedent in the Trump 1 White House. And when I hear you, Courtney, refer to they, I had a direct role in writing some of those OMB guidances that were directed from the first AI executive order and working alongside folks like Michael Kratsios in the first Trump White House. So I'll give a plug for that. And I think that there actually was maybe more continuity than people realize, but that's not a promise. Past performance is not a promise of future performance. So we'll see if there's a strong divergent. Courtney, I wanted to go to you anyway. Look, we can't get out of this conversation without talking about DeepSeek. But we can sort of throw in the announcement of Stargate, which I think was a thing that we didn't anticipate. It wasn't on our 2025 bingo card, at least not for January. What the folks you work with, the members of your organization, like what do they think this does to the prior trajectory of policy or the attitude or trade, or what lessons can we draw?
Yeah, so I think as a general matter, obviously, several of the folks that were a part of this announcement are a part of our membership. I think we echo their enthusiasm and commitment to kind of making this plan a reality. Infrastructure is going to be so important in fostering continued American innovation and U.S. leadership in this space. And so I think, there is a lot of excitement around the announcement. We are certainly pleased to see, so much focus. There was also, I think, continued from the prior administration. There was an infrastructure executive order as well that came out just before Trump came into office. And so I think, we're excited to also see the way in which policy develops around really making sure that there is this robust set of infrastructure in place to support continued development of these AI systems, as well as emerging technology more generally. So
Sorry, just changing
all good.
spots so
I
I can
was
get
not sure where you
slightly
went.
better. I mean, Alejandra, on the point on the issues that you work on, but as well as kind of this general topic, I mean, I've been having conversations with staff on the Hill, committee staff that are particularly interested in where are they going to engage, what are their opportunities given the jurisdiction of their particular committees. And they've been asking me the question, which is why I'm kind of asking it. What is it? What does DeepSeek mean? What does Stargate mean? Like, what are our opportunities? And the best I can tell them is, look, I think you can produce any take that you want, but it's a good thing that this issue is being brought to the forefront. That DeepSeek, regardless of what you think its impact is, it forces it. I mean, it's like 4 of the top 10 articles on pretty much every major news website, right? At least for a small period. It's being asked about in confirmation hearings. It's forcing that political salience of the issue. And no matter what your views are, what you think policy should be, that's going to be your opportunity to get your boss engaged, to get them to be able to shoehorn their pet project, their issue, onto the front page of the political landscape. Is that, like, do you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would take a similar, any opportunity to showcase the need for better AI policy and to really highlight this is a top priority for the administration, for folks on the Hill. That's a win for us, recognizing that, especially in the civil rights community, we're battling, across so many different issues. Tech policy, AI policy is not always seen as a priority. And so for us, really having the opportunity to use something like these headlines as a focus of, not only is this important for tech policy, for AI, this is an economic issue. We're going to see drastic impacts that this will have on the US economic market. So it gives us an in with members on the Hill, with our own constituents, with our civil rights colleagues, to talk about why this matters. So we always want to kind of jump on those opportunities. But just reiterating, I think there are some kind of like challenges when we see something from a foreign government kind of shift the conversation toward, well, the United States needs to be at the top. We're running a global race toward AI dominance, and we need innovation at all costs. And that means, without guardrails, without the safety we need. I know Will said he didn't want to get into the DEI stuff, but it does signal some of the challenges around disparate impact and the way that we know our communities are facing challenges. And so while we want to take the opportunities to highlight this as a critical issue, we need to remind our policymakers that this innovation at all costs is not necessarily the best method, that we require guardrails to make sure that particularly marginalized communities, Black and Brown folks, are not harmed by this technology in ways that we already are seeing. So that's why when, in Conversations on the Hill, we were proud to endorse Senator Markey's AI Civil Rights Act, which was doing a lot of work to stall or to mitigate disparate impact and other harms that AI is having. So we're hopeful that those conversations could return, but obviously we're also gonna see if we can impact in other ways, knowing that policymakers might be shifting their focus.
I'd love to add one more opportunity, if you don't mind, Satya. Thank you. Where I hope we'll see more staff. We started to see a lot of efforts to really understand AI better. Both the members of Congress through the Insight Forum, the bipartisan work to bring in leaders and inform themselves, as well as amongst the staff. Several organizations, including EqualAI, have been able to work with staff to do deep dives on AI literacy. And as Alejandra just mentioned, there are also bills that are really important in this space. I hope we'll see more staff, more members, and the administration focusing on AI literacy so that everything we're talking about here can be more meaningful to more people, whether you are drafting the legislation, whether you are in industry, in what I would call an AI company, which is not necessarily the foundation model companies we're thinking about. Most companies are now AI AI companies, most organizations, because they and their staff are using AI in really pivotal ways and might not understand its power and its pitfalls. So understanding how to govern it needs to start with AI literacy. And I hope that's something where we'll see more efforts from the administration, from the Hill.
Can I add one thing though? I think Satya, you're exactly right about what DeepSeek has done, which is raise the political salience of AI and AI competition just writ large, right? If there's one thing that can unite both the left and the right, it's a conversation about competition with China. And I think that is something that is interesting to note in the way that, in 2018, Cambridge Analytica shifted the big tech debate, and I think really shifted the kind of political conversation there as well. The one thing I've mentioned about China is I've been, in the last year or two, I've been trying to follow China as much as possible and trying to understand what's actually going on, because there's this really interesting kind of bureaucratic machinations that goes on behind Xi Jinping. And the one thing that I think is that's interesting to notice is that, for the most part, the People's Daily, which I've kind of started, following in a kind of regular sense, right? There's been some really interesting analysis that's done of People's Daily. Most of the interest on the AI front has been on semiconductors and not necessarily on the models, and specifically on frontier models. And it seems that the first major recognition of the importance of DeepSeek was actually last week on Monday anyway, when there were very clear pictures of DeepSeek's CEO in front of the premiere. And I think that's also kind of interesting to notice here is that, I follow a lot of these kind of, on Twitter, these mouthpieces of the Chinese Communist Party, and they really, for the first time, had mentioned DeepSeek in their way last week. So all of this is to say, I think that the CCP leadership has also woken up to the fact of DeepSeek, and I'm a little bit more cautious about what we can say about the relationships between those, between the company itself, which obviously clearly has been beholden and has, it's clearly has reporting requirements to the government. But I think that as far as an attention is concerned, right, that you see this so much with digital companies in China, or these kind of large platform companies in China. They raise to a certain level, they get to a certain salience on their own, and then they're brought into the fold. And I think that's what we just saw as well. I could be wrong, I could be misreading this, but given the fact that we're now seeing attention being paid by the top leadership, I think that in itself is suggestive, because that only really just happened last week.
Yeah, trying to parse the sort of CCP machinations. Reminded of those like old criminologists that would like sit in the basement of Foggy Bottom and have to try to parse through, or like it's kind of like this Talmudic eisegesis of what these communiques mean. I think Bill Bishop at Sinosysm does a really good job of like actually going through, and so there's certainly like lessons to be learned there. I think for a general audience, it's can be really tough to parse, but I think the overall contour is probably as you say. That reminds me of, so I was thinking about, Miriam made a reference to the what she's calling AI companies, but that doesn't just mean like the model building companies. It means kind of this ecosystem and downstream users, and kind of at some level, every company above a certain size will have some meaningful use of AI, so we can sort of call them an AI company. But the Stargate announcement, right? So it involves OpenAI, so that's obviously a foundation, frontier edge model. But it seems to be of a piece with the focus on generalized infrastructure investment, trying to expand the capacity, the industrial capacity. We had the Chips and Science Act. We've had, say, subsidies for like battery production and like battery inputs. Now we seem to be moving, but it may be premature for me to call this. We seem to be moving of what is the AI infrastructure, and if we use like an actual workable definition of infrastructure, right? It's some kind of resource that can be used that's like a core input that can be used by a variety of industries, can be repurposed for very specific use, and not for a specific company or a specific industry. But we're building an AI infrastructure. Will, I want to stay with you for a second. Like, do you think that's where? I mean, we all seem to be industrial policy fans now. Or at least that's the consensus in DC. Is the focus going to be on, all right, maybe not so much with the electric cars, but now with the data centers?
So I want to take that in two parts. The first part about Stargate, which I think is very important to understand, is this is the first piece of infrastructure that OpenAI has ever done, right? So I think that's actually what's important about this. This is their first effort ever to create, right? Elon Musk through XAI, which is helping to power Grok. He already has a massive data center that he's building out in Tennessee, Colossus. But OpenAI, which is arguably the leader in the frontier models, doesn't even have their own infrastructure, right? They basically borrow everything. So I think that Stargate, first and foremost, and to be honest, I mean, I've been waiting for this for quite a while. I was actually kind of surprised because they announced what this infrastructure is going to look like back in October. They had an infrastructure as destiny white paper where they said very clearly this, what we're going to build is it's going to cost $100 billion. It's going to have 2 million GPUs. It's going to be 5 gigawatts, and we need all of these things in order to make the next stage, the next step of our development for what they're doing for agents, right? They were very, very clear about that in October. So the fact that that idea and that it came out, I was kind of surprised that it didn't come closer, right? Because maybe it was just trying to soften soften things up a bit. But needless to say, I think this is a really big part of understanding what's going on with Stargate, which is it's OpenAI's first emphasis on infrastructure. There's a second thing that's happening with just generally with data centers, and that's primarily having tensions very locally, right? The big data centers are happening in Texas and Iowa, in Texas, Iowa, Virginia. Virginia is the biggest one, and so it's creating local strains of energy issues. So I think what's probably interesting to think about this, and what I really picked up from the announcement on the second day of Trump's administration, was the thing that Trump said wasn't really anything about investment. He really talked. I mean, he did talk about investment, but the thing that he mentioned policy wise was actually on permitting and energy issues. Right? It was basically on connecting these new data centers to the grid. So I think that's what's interesting is that what's happening with that conversation with data centers is that there's now very clear attention being paid to the energy requirements, the water requirements. All of these things are now coming into the larger conversation. So in that way, I think we have two things going on. One of them is OpenAI basically capitalizing effectively, right? And then the other is the broader market that is shifting and realizing that a world of decreasing energy usage is probably in the past, and we're probably going to be seeing a near-term world where we increase energy usage massively, and trying to figure out how to expand our supply of energy is going to be the big question. The one thing I'm just ending on this really quickly.
Courtney and Alejandra. Okay. Courtney and Alejandra, I wanted to cue this up for you. So we talked a little bit about like what has changed, and maybe the answer is like not much in the last 2 weeks, but it's sort of directionally you could extrapolate out and say this is an opportunity for an evaluation, a pause, part of a larger regulatory freeze. But I want to think about are there sort of institutional, meaningful elements of the Biden administration, of the Biden EO, that could actually stick around after that pause? I'm thinking of things that have received significant bipartisan support in Congress, the AI Safety Institute, or at least NIST, the work in developing standards, the NAIR, the AI Research Resource. Trump is, if nothing else, a deal maker. I don't know how much he particularly cares about the AI Safety Institute, and if there's an opportunity to keep it around and curry some political favor with some members, Republican members of the Senate or the House, even in a rebranded way. Maybe it has to take on a new name because it has to have, like an AI Greatness Institute or something. But kind of given that same work, and I'm plugging it because, again, just to sort of talk my own book. In the earlier work that we did in the first Trump administration, there was a direction to NIST to engage across government and with the private sector in developing standards, best practices. Didn't call it an AI Safety Institute, but if you kind of peel off the label, the food was the same inside the packaging, right? So, are there opportunities, Courtney? We'll start with you, that you think plausibly, like they may take a look and say, yeah, I mean, they kind of got it right. Maybe we got to change around the margins, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. Obviously, yes, everyone is wondering, about the fate of the USAI Safety Institute. And as you noted, I think, we at ITI have been very supportive of its work and its existence. And I think coming from a global perspective as well, it's really important to think about, what that brings to the global conversation. And so, I do think, yes, we might see perhaps a bit of a rethink around what it's named or what it's called, but I do think there is really important foundational work that NIST has been doing long before kind of the creation of the AI Safety Institute that we would like to see continue, and which I think is really important to advancing the global conversation as well. And so what I mean to say is that, as we are kind of going through a moment where perhaps we don't have, the full vision of the Trump administration on AI, it's really important that we have a seat at that international table, that we can bring kind of the standards and best practices that NIST has worked closely with industry to develop to that global conversation to continue to advance that. And I do think, a lot of the work of the USAI Safety Institute has been focused on really figuring out how do we operationalize some of these kind of key themes and concepts that have been articulated in larger scale frameworks like the AI risk management framework, and what are the ways in which companies can do that. And that work has been really helpful to companies because companies want to build their products in a way that breeds trust. It is good for business to create products in a way that allows for that to happen. And so to engage with the AI Safety Institute or Big NIST in whatever form that takes moving forward, I think is a real opportunity. And then certainly around the National AI Research Resource, I think that's another area where that can be really helpful to advancing innovation. And if we're really focused on how do we create an enabling environment for innovation, I think democratizing access to AI, to compute, to data, creating that type of platform for researchers and institutions who may not otherwise have that access is still something that's going to be really important. I think, whether it retains the same name or format, remains to be seen. But I also think that's something that's really critical. And then maybe one last point is around kind of the cybersecurity work that we actually saw undertaken as a result of the Biden administration executive order. That's something that I think will remain important. Cybersecurity is a bipartisan priority. I think that's an area where, again, continuing to work on AI security, continuing to look at ways in which AI can be used to bolster cybersecurity, to identify vulnerabilities. Those are all things that I think, we might see a continued focus on moving forward. And I'll let Alejandra jump in as well.
No, echoing a lot of what Courtney has already said. I think we are also hopeful, at least, that the AI Safety Institute, NAIR, and NAIR can also kind of move forward. We saw broad bipartisan support for their work. We almost saw the Safety Institute codified in law. Though there are some concerns with Senator Cruz taking over the Senate Commerce Committee. So, we do have to watch that. I think for us, one of the biggest concerns, though, is that for those bodies to be as effective and productive as possible, they have to have the resources and ability to test the technology, have accountability metrics to really hold the models and technology accountable, and then enforce that. Or develop some level of enforcement, because the research and the standards are only as beneficial as they are to be able to actually put them into practice. So we're hopeful, but definitely something for us to watch.
And if you don't mind, Satya, can I just underscore one point that I want to make sure we don't conflate here? It's really important to have these conversations about, and we'll see, with NAIR and the AI Safety Institute, but that's separate and aside from NIST, from my perspective, which has been around for 123 years. They've been leading on AI work since the Trump administration, if not before. In different ways, we might have called it different things previously. But as we've talked about, a lot of the work that has happened here, the risk management framework, started under the last Trump administration. They're such an important infrastructure. I think they put the US on the map in so many ways with AI policy, and still have with their framework that's been adopted by companies and a baseline for many countries across the world. So just wanted to make sure we clarify that distinction.
So I want to go to the audience questions, some of which were already on my list too. So I'm going to go ahead and take credit for them. But and I'll throw these out to anyone if anyone wants to jump in. So as part of the AI Safety Institute Biden executive order, a number of leading AI labs entered into voluntary agreements to share their safety data, to engage with the folks at the AI Safety Institute. There's nothing in the repeal of the EO that also undoes that, but these were voluntary to begin with. So what do we think the future of that is? A lot of the rhetoric around repealing the Biden EO is getting rid of burdensome reporting requirements. But of course, none of those requirements ever went into place. These were all voluntary up until this point. So do you think there's some profit from the Trump administration saying like, hey, we're friendly with these guys now. Let's keep let's keep the good times rolling and information sharing.
I think for us, the biggest concern has always been that those are voluntary commitments. Without the like regulatory frameworks to actually hold the companies accountable, there's still some challenges. We could definitely see that continue, and that would be a positive step forward. But given some of the signals we've seen from tech companies in the past couple of weeks about changes that they're making to fact-checking policy, to DEI rollbacks, all of these things, at least in the civil rights space, we're deeply concerned that these voluntary commitments are not going to be upheld and kept to the same standard that they would have been under a different administration.
So another policy decision that the Trump administration has to make. In fact, literally in the last week or so of the Biden administration was this AI diffusion rule. There's a continuation of engagement in export controls that began the Biden administration really in October of 23. But also itself was there was an antecedent with respect to Huawei and ZTE in the first Trump administration. So again, that we're all kind of trade restrictionists now and industrial policy experts. What's the future path of export controls? You can start with the AI diffusion rule specifically, or just in general. Is it going to be more restrictions in response to DeepSeek? Is there going to be a direction change? Anyone have thoughts on that?
I mean, I'll take that real quick. This is something I've been trying to understand. One thing that's notable about DeepSeek is that DeepSeek trained its models on hardware that was available from in between the first version of the Biden administration's export controls, which started in 2022, and then those were basically closed in 2023. So the chips that they used were A800s, if I recall correctly. And we've seen since then, right? We saw 2022 there was a change, a new set of guidelines. 2023 there was a new set of guidelines. Then last year, 2024, there was even more restrictions on tools. And then now we have this diffusion rule, or what some call it like a compute rule or a compute restriction. That still has time for the current Trump administration to shift, right? That's still technically open, and they actually had built in time. I believe it's March 15th, if I recall correctly, that they
can 120 days comment period, I think.
Yeah, 120 days comment period. Yeah, yes. So they could still do something in this, and I think that probably is going to be it'll be interesting to see. I think that what the Trump administration does with that, I think is going to be could be a bellwether, because it could show what direction they're headed. That the DeepSeek question, I think, is also really interesting. One thing I would mention is that I think it's real some of the innovations that they have charted, and I think what's not appreciated right now I hope it's appreciated, is that we're now at a stage where OpenAI, where Anthropic, where all these companies that have been deploying frontier models for quite some time now have new tools to deploy them quicker. And if DeepSeek is actually true as it says it is, right? If it's being very honest about its advancements, I mean, it's kind of an open secret now that the companies are working to implement those in their own spaces to see if they actually work practically. We're still kind of at the early stages of that, because effectively DeepSeek only really announced it in the end of or mid-December, kind of these advances and they're actually pretty key and important advances, because they could make all of the hardware that NVIDIA has actually a lot more valuable. NVIDIA is becoming faster and quicker, and in fact, one of the big constraints is that not a lot of effort has been placed on basically on using memory efficiently within the chipsets. And what DeepSeek shows is a pathway to make efficient memory transfers and to use basically better matrices calculations. And what I think that's important is, like, if that actually applies and is the booster, like the jet fuel that we think it is, or at least that some are suspecting that it is, that means that all of the things that we see, all of the costs are going to go down for OpenAI. I think it actually means you should probably buy the dip. I mean, that's what I would say.
There's always been this access effect, right? Like within the large language model paradigm, there's been an increasing efficiency where you can get sort of the same level of capacity with less and less training effort and compute and energy. Now there's an argument about like, does that have a limit? Like, how are there diminishing returns to that?
I mean, they
But
found their
this
limit,
was a
right?
well, yeah, and this is what I this is, but this is on your just following on your last point. It seems strange to me that basically what we saw was an incredible increase in productivity, and when has that ever been a bad thing? And suddenly the market just responded like a totally like kind of bananas way, in response to, hey, it is now capable to get more from less,
Yep.
right? Like, and that's not a but it points to, and this is one of our audience questions, this is why I'm bringing it up. I think the focus, there's many companies taking lots of approaches, smaller ones, some ones we haven't heard of, but really in terms of national policy, the focus has been on expanding expanding the compute capacity. You mentioned Grok building this kind of monster data center set. Now Stargate is announcing like it's really, but not really the focus on sort of how to drive more efficiency out of the existing architecture, right? Or the existing infrastructure. You can do both. It's not like one or the other, but it does seem like the last couple of years have been all about the former. And maybe DeepSeek kind of pushes us off into a new equilibrium where, hey, maybe the goal is more efficient, more cheaper models that expand the possibility production frontier to kind of like conflate a couple of different things. So, like, what do we think are the national security implications of expanding data centers to maximize the quality of existing models rather than on focusing on building newer, more efficient models? Does this change our national security posture? And this is an appropriate question for export controls.
I mean, I
Courtney, I
think,
see you thinking.
yeah, no, I was just trying to parse that question a little bit. I mean, I think it's, as you noted, not necessarily binary. You can do both. And I think the important thing to remember with data center infrastructure is, yes, obviously a lot of the impetus is to provide additional compute, but it's not only about compute. Data centers can be used for a variety of other infrastructure needs. And so I think, yes, pursuing model efficiency and kind of using compute in that way is important, and certainly more compute will be beneficial. There's also now, I think, an opportunity that DeepSeek demonstrates for companies to perhaps think a little bit more about maybe how do we want to approach this moving forward? Are there other areas of opportunity for us? What are we uniquely positioned to do or be good at? But beyond that, I mean, I do think kind of massive data center infrastructure is a good thing for allowing for more rapid response to kind of cybersecurity and emerging threats. I think there's a potential to leverage that for developing more specialized task-specific AI applications, right, in the cybersecurity context. I still think there's a lot to be said for having kind of this increased infrastructure from, a helpful national security perspective. And, with that being said, I think, it's not necessarily or it's both to some extent. So
I do want to jump in and just reiterate the point that Will brought up earlier about the energy consumption, water usage. I do think that there's something to be said about, again, it's not a binary, but finding ways to move toward a more efficient and energy efficient models and infrastructure is going to be critical for us if we want to remain dominant in the space.
To kind of bring together some of those pieces together real quick. The entire industry really is shifting away, right, from pre-training and large. I mean, they are still having large models at the training level, but I think what we're seeing now with DeepSeek, what we're seeing with the the O1 reasoners, kind of all of the new generation of models that have come out, is that there's a lot more attention now being paid to what's called test time compute. So it's basically on the inference side, you spend more time giving the model time to think. And this is a common method that was used by people who were, by prompt engineers, people who were trying to get the most out of ChatGPT, and they were doing something very similar, right? But what we're seeing is the entire industry move away from a little bit less attention on the training side and much more on the inference side, and focusing on the resources that are related on the inference side. And that's, I think, what's really interesting about DeepSeek, because we know that OpenAI, their some of their advanced models just to answer one question costs $300 or $400 just to answer a single question. So if you can get that price down to 5 to 13% of that realm, which is what DeepSeek has suggested with their kind of their memory maximization technique. It's called MLA. Just look up MLA if you're interested. That actually means that the entire service itself can be provided at a much lower level. But it also suggests that there's a lot more interest now in this other side on the inference side. And I think, you kind of suggested it with Grok, but there's also another Grok, right? There's another company that's called Grok that just focuses primarily on inference. And that I think is what we're seeing. We're seeing kind of the old paradigms, particularly the super large data sets being not as much attention paid, right? Still important, but that what we're seeing near term is a lot more attention paid on the reinforcement learning on the inference side. It's much more on the structure of what the outputs look like. And it seems we can get really big increases in complexity and reasoning capabilities just by focusing on that. So again, it shows that to me, it shows this open competition model. I hope that we're generally open about what's going on, because that means that American companies are going to continue to succeed in this, right? I mean, DeepSeek has a really structural problems with its compute capacity, which it kind of solved. But if you want to continue building actually commercially viable services, you probably need something that is more like the service, like AWS, more like what OpenAI is going to provide, something that connects the data centers within the intelligence that combines those two things. And as long as you have kind of an open system of science where everyone kind of knows the best ways and the best pathways to chart for more efficient training and intelligence programs and intelligence systems, that to me seems like everyone's going to win, and especially people who are on the frontier are going to
Well,
continue.
and this and the to the point about, I mean, I think just whatever policy that we have, I help it midwifes, instead of everyone sort of chasing the same goal, that we have like a separation. There's kind of like a separation equilibrium and different, because even the either or, that this isn't binary. I mean, even like we've seen some returns to inference through overtraining, right? So like even you can do like some like a higher sort of fixed cost at the front end, or so on, and still be able to get, and also like whether you're looking for like long context output or more simplified tasks, like those are different, right? Those are so. I take every point. I want to ask one more audience question and make sure we have a chance to wrap up. So I kind of have to ask about Doge. So, now it seems to have like, it's like the dog that was hunting for a bone, the Doge that was hunting for a bone, and it found it at the U.S. Digital Service. And the U.S. Digital Service, all of you on this panel know, is not a regulatory office. It's not an office that made like huge personnel decisions. It was an office that tried to improve services across the federal government, worked with like GSA and various other kind of shared services elements within the federal government to improve IT and technical things. Um, doesn't this, I'll ask it in a leading way. Doesn't this seem like an opportunity, kind of overambitious rhetoric aside, like this is an opportunity to help agencies improve services to exploit AI and some of the new tools that are available to increase customer satisfaction with their interaction with their government? Or do we think this is going to be a missed opportunity? No one wants to take the Doge question.
I mean, it's a
Alejandra, go ahead.
I'm a very much a tech optimist at heart, despite everything I've shared today. And so I want to say it. Yes, there is extreme opportunity for efficiency, for shifts in the way we engage with communities and provide services. My concern or my worry is that as we're removing some of the, as we talked about earlier, some of the guidance that was provided to agencies on tracking, providing transparency, providing kind of showcasing the types of technology and AI systems that we're deploying through our government, I worry that we will miss some of the key opportunities to use the best technology, the safest and the fairest technology. And so without that type of transparency and reporting requirements, I do worry a little bit about transitioning too far toward, I don't want to be doomsday, but like the robots are taking over everything kind of space.
The one other element
Go ahead.
I would note here through digital services, it's kind of fascinating that they're only really focusing on services, on digital services, right? That to me is also very telling, right? Obviously, digital services by way of background came about through healthcare.gov. It was, had serious problems in the digital side of things. And that's kind of interesting because I really know. I don't think we truly know how or why it's through USDS. Most people suspected it was going to be through a completely different method through basically an advisory committee system, which has been what was suggested when this idea was originally put out there, which would mean it'd be subject to completely different regulatory structures. But that I don't know. I'm still kind of trying to parse this through, right? Why the digital service? Why this thing that typically helps companies make, or helps agencies make better websites, do surveys, do et cetera, and like do better digital services. Why is that the through path through Doge? The other part of this is that there's going to be effectively people at every single agency that are working towards Doge, output. So I think there's 5 individuals or 3 individuals that are now at each agency directed just directed to Doge or, towards management and better streamlining. But again, that is still kind of not what we expected. So it's just going to be interesting to see how these things parse out, because what I expect, it's the normal way and the normal pathway, and then all of the suggestions are leading one way, and then the administration kind of chooses a different pathway and they put it in USDS, and that is just kind of an odd suggestion. And even formerly, like, why don't they just ask for reorganization authorization, right? That's also kind of another thing that I don't understand.
Because legislating is super hard, Will, and we don't want to do it. Miriam, I saw you unmuted, but we have 2 minutes left, so I want to give everyone just a chance to wrap up on any topic or anything we discussed today. But Miriam, please.
Sorry, well, I was just rounding out the point of on Doge, why they chose. I mean, they happen to choose an organization that's small, nimble, highly respected, proven itself effective in punching well above its weight, as Will mentioned, placed throughout the government. So, and not only is legislating hard, reorg of government is super hard. So starting with a budget and authorities and a staff is certainly desirable if you want to start having impact anytime within a few months. In any event, I think that a really important point here is getting back my bias to AI literacy. And we just launched an initiative yesterday. I think we have a real opportunity. It's bipartisan. We just interviewed Senator Rounds on our podcast most recently, and he talked a lot about his interest in this personally as a citizen, as a husband, as a lawmaker. So I'm hopeful that this is something, and grateful that you host this conversation today, because more people have to understand under the hood what's happening and how they can play a role.
Courtney, any final thoughts? We got 1 minute left.
Sure, I will try to give 30 seconds of final thoughts. I mean, I think, like I said at the outset, we're in a moment of reset. I think there's an opportunity for the new administration to think about what has, possibly worked, what hasn't worked, how do they want to approach things. I think it's really important that we have a clear vision of what American leadership looks like in the AI space, especially as we are continuing to engage in global conversations. We have the big AI Action Summit coming up in just about a week and a half. And so, really making sure that we have that clear vision, which can be articulated to our international partners so that we are kind of bringing those American values overseas is really, really important. So I will stop there and really appreciate you bringing us together for the discussion today.
Alejandra, Will, Miriam, Courtney, thanks. Beth, my health, Satya, Thallam, and my colleague Chris McKenzie, Americans Responsible Innovation. Folks in the press can reach out to Chris. Anyone else, feel free to reach out to myself, and I'm happy to connect you to the other panelists. Obviously, not the last conversation that we're having, and it changes day by day. I encourage you to follow all the panelists' organizations to get updates and stay abreast on their particular lanes in AI, but obviously this is an issue that's going to end up touching everything. So if we reconvene in a week, it'll be a totally different conversation. That's what makes it exciting. So again, appreciate all of you joining us, and hopefully we will see you again soon.